All right, Crim 11, let's knock out Chapter 6, Delinquency across the life course. So, here's all your objectives, blah, 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 blah. Life course theory, a theoretical perspective that examines the events in the life course that may influence a person to choose one path over another. So we've been talking about a lot of things like individual causes of delinquent behavior, social causes of delinquent behavior. This kind of throws another dynamic into that, in that sometimes it's just the choices that we make throughout our life that kind of lead us to one thing or another. So the human agency, basically talking about choices and decisions based on alternatives that you see before you. You know that when there have been many times throughout my life, when you had the opportunity to go one way or another, and that one choice could dramatically affect the whole trajectory of your life one way or the other. I mean, think about the night that someone decided to have a couple drinks and drive themselves home. Maybe they've done it 30 other times, but this night, as they were driving home, they hit and killed somebody. It's that one choice, that one thing that could be the difference between having a great life and having a terrible life. So anyways, let's move on. We're going to talk about all this stuff about protective factors, antisocial behavior, risks at different ages, and things like that. So, okay, I'm going to probably ask you the difference between a criminal career and a career criminal. Okay, a criminal career is the period of time between the first criminal act and the last criminal act that a person commits. So let's say throughout my whole life, I'm making this up, I committed my first crime at 16 and my last one was at 18. And since then I have done nothing else, no other illegal activity. My criminal career was between the ages of 16 and 18. Okay? Career criminal. Very different. This is a person who commits crimes throughout their life. Okay, so criminal career is just the period of time that a person was committing criminal acts or delinquent acts, as we're talking about here. A lot of juveniles will only commit delinquent acts when they're juveniles, and they will grow out of it and never commit a crime again. Okay, so criminal career is just the length of time between the first and last offense that a person commits in their life. Persistence is a person continuing to commit delinquent or criminal acts, and desistance is when that career stops. Okay. Dimensions of offending, various aspects of criminal career that may sometimes it's one offense, sometimes it's 15. How serious are these offenses and how long is their career? That it depends on the choices that are made by the offenders. So delinquency is shaped by several general factors: the lack of competence in adolescence, cumulative disadvantage, and turning points. So all three of these things hopefully make sense, but we're going to get into it a little bit more. Evaluate the factors that influence the length and intensity of juvenile offending. And I'm going to tell you that the number one factor in determining how long one's criminal career will be is the age of onset. The age of onset is the age at which an offender commits their first criminal act. So if I have an offender, and I worked with juveniles for the majority of my career, if I had an offender that I got on probation when he was 11, for me, it was very likely that that child was going to end up growing up with me as his probation officer. And I had one specifically like that, and I'll talk about him in a minute. But if I got an offender whose first offense was something minor at the age of 17, I was much less likely to see them again. So the younger you are when you commit your first criminal act, the more likely you are to continue. That was the key factor, the most important factor in deciding the length of one's criminal career. So again, this kid, I probably for reals got him when he was about 13. I know he was in junior high school and he was on the electronic monitor. I went out to his house because he never answered the phone when I was trying to contact him. And he was home taking care of his 7-year-old sister while he was on the electronic monitor, which I thought was a really bad idea. But anyways, I ended up with this kid up until his 18th birthday, off and on. He was in custody part of the time, but he continued to reoffend. He continued to commit more serious offenses. And because he was so young when he committed his first offense, he was more likely to continue. But I got to tell you, there's actually a good end to this story. I bumped into him at the grocery store about a year ago. I think it was last summer, which was shocking to me that I happened to be, I'm cruising down the frozen foods aisle and there he is. And he says, "Fernandez, oh my gosh, I haven't been locked up in a whole year." And I was so proud of him. And those are kind of the baby steps that you take toward realizing that every now and then you do stuff that matters. But he was happy to see me, which I thought was pretty funny because, we grew up together. I arrested him numerous times. I chased him. I had warrants for him. We kicked his door down, all kinds of stuff. But as an adult, knock on wood, as of last summer, he hadn't been arrested yet. So anyways, it was cool. So escalation of offenses, like I said, with him especially too, he was really young, and the first offense he committed probably not that serious, but the escalation, meaning the seriousness of the offenses, they grew with time with this kid, and that typically will happen until about 17. So this is just a picture of basically what we're talking about. A lot of times offenders, especially juveniles, will specialize in certain types of offenses. As you can imagine, in Fresno, there's certain things that are pretty kind of those predominant criminal behaviors that take place. Fresno happens to be known as, not anymore, but we were the vehicle theft capital of the world, I believe, but certainly of the United States. And this was probably, 10 years ago, but kids specifically got really good at committing certain offenses, and vehicle theft was one of those. So anyways, yes, they do kind of specialize. A chronic offender continues to offend and offend and offend and offend. So you can kind of figure that out, I'm thinking. Length of the criminal career tend to be longer for violent offenders, those with early convictions, or for minority offenders. Okay. So keep that in mind. Does that mean that minority offenders commit more crime than white offenders? Studies have shown that is not the case, but I believe minority offenders are arrested more frequently. Longitudinal studies over time. Okay, so there were a couple of studies that took place. This is not the one that I'm thinking of. Life course persistent offenders were people who started early in life and continued throughout their life. These are kind of career criminals. Adolescent limited offenders were those that only committed crimes for short periods of time over their adolescent years. This is the one I think is really interesting and really sad. I'm guaranteed there's at least one or two of you that work in a school or work with kids, or you can remember, or you're a parent and you can see it, or you remember when you were in school. There were some kids that you probably saw in kindergarten that you kind of knew. You're like, that kid is going to be a criminal. It's really, 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 really sad, but it's true. Those kids whose behavior was negative in kindergarten were much more likely than others to become delinquents before they even got to high school. Physical aggression during kindergarten is the best behavioral predictor for later delinquency. Oh my gosh. I know, you're thinking this is a 5-year-old kid. So when you see that stuff, it's happening. It happens very young. It happens to these poor children who maybe don't have support at home, or maybe they have issues, health issues, mental health issues, autism, learning disabilities, and things that aren't being addressed. So this one was really sad to me. This study found that children who were hyperactive, impulsive, of low intelligence, had poor school achievement, family criminality, family poverty, and poor parenting were more likely to be delinquents. I'm guessing that there's not a lot of shock to that statement, so I wonder how much money they spent on that study. But anyways, protective factors. Protective factors. We talked about, I think I told you my favorite word in one of the other chapters was resilience. And protective factors are things that are in place that make a child less likely to go down the delinquent path. And some of you probably know, can firsthand attest to this kind of stuff. I told you that one of the reasons why I felt like I stayed on the straight and narrow was because of my mom. That was a protective factor for me. My husband had a big family, a big extended family, and they all looked out for him. They were his protectors. He was smart. He was a good athlete. Those were things that were protective factors for him. Maybe he had resilience. These are all kinds of protective factors that if a child, even in a really bad situation, has these protective factors, they're more likely to come out on the other side without a delinquent or criminal behavior. These are variables that function to insulate. Yeah, so like imagine you're wrapped in bubble wrap. The protective factors to me are kind of like a big bubble wrap thing. Even if you're around a lot of high-risk individuals, if you have those protective factors, you're less likely to fall into it. And that's it. Yay.